Do you like speed? Are the World Eaters a little too mindless, and the Space Wolves a little too on the nose? Maybe you want your flavor of armored space racists to not be a meat blender, but to actually have some personality on the side. Then allow me to sell you on Brotherhood of the Storm, and with hope, the full White Scars trilogy. While it's only a novella consisting of 7 chapters, being part of a greater anthology of stories, Brotherhood of the Storm is the first introduction into the story of the White Scars, and Chris Wright starts it off on the right foot. The story of this book comes in 2 parts. The first follows Shiban Khan, the Khan part of his name being his rank as one of the Khans, or captains, of Jagatai's Great Horde. The second covers an officer of the Departamento Munitorum, a general no less, and the closest I have seen to an Imperial shut-in by the name of Iilya Revellion, who has been tasked with finding the 5th Legion after their departure from Olenor. I remember much of what he said even now, but we all learned quicker from example than words. That is the way we were made. We watched and we acted. We took delights in the speed we traveled. Perhaps we went too far, too fast, though I regret nothing. We were true to our nature, and in the final test, that is what saved us. We begin at the beginning days of the Chondax campaign, named aptly after the planet it's centered around. Chondax itself is a near barren world, uninhabitable by life to the point the White Scars must keep themselves supplied through bulklanders. Its soil is soft, but it consists entirely of salt, much like your average League of Legends game or Hoth ripoff. This barren nature makes it a perfect place for the White Scars, as there is little in the way of buildings or foliage to hinder their vehicles. The orcs whom they are hunting down on the world is simply a bonus to the endless horizons. The orcs here were the remnants of the Olenor campaign, some of the last survivors of the War Master's greatest triumph. They had used the scrap of their crashed fleets to build their ad hoc vehicles, ignoring the White Scars hunting them down in order to regroup at a stronghold where they had planned to gather. Shiban remarks that the orcs used to engage them immediately, as someone familiar with orchid behavior would expect them to. However, the 5th Legion had been handing them their teeth on a platter so often that the orcs are now avoiding a good scrap. Instead, they ignore the Astartes to continue towards the stronghold these orc bands have been congregating in, as they hope to bring the weight of numbers to mitigate the White Scars' speed. Shiban Khan's pursuit of these fleeing orcs leads him to finding one of their convoys, particularly by the clouds of smog their scrap machines produce. Him and his 5 companies needed no order to engage. Only a single word: pray. Now, instead of doing something other legions would do, such as targeting the convoy's mobility, the White Scars instead take a page from our favorite post-apocalypse Down Under and engage the orcs at full throttle. The orcs even have their own 8-wheeler truck at the center of the convoy. The comparison is so uncanny, it would not have felt out of place if one of them had yelled, "Witness me!" Rather than destroying this massive vehicle by gunshot or explosive, Shiban ditches his bike to jump onto the orc 8-wheeler like a suicidal maniac and fight over a dozen orcs hand-to-hand, like a blender with his own laugh track. While the war boss of the convoy does try to engage Shiban, he is struck down within the first traded blows, too slow to keep up with the White Scar. Despite the fact all this scene is missing is a servo skull yelling "World Star," this is still only the second most insane thing Shiban does in this novella. The introduction to Shiban winds down with the meeting of another brotherhood, the Brotherhood of the Moon, led by Torgan Khan, a Terran-born. The meeting is less that between brothers and more that of steppe lords. There is no camaraderie as much as courtesy and a desire for both not to step on each other's toes. Torgan is a veteran from the days before Jagatai's discovery, and while he has adopted some of the White Scars' new doctrines, he still holds stubbornly to some of the more standard Astartesian doctrines they used in the early days under Horus. There had always been a bit of an unmistakable rift between the White Scar Shiban and the Star Hunter Torgan, where Shiban relishes in the speed and freedom of the White Scars' new ways of war. Torgan seems to miss the days where the 5th Legion served under Horus. Another example is that Shiban spends very little time ordering his men. He issues the initial order of attack, but then trusts his men to take care of themselves from then on, trusting in his men's combat and decision-making skills. Torgan, on the other hand, is a much more standard Astartesian line captain. He commands his men through the entire engagement, keeping a hand on his men and controlling the engagement through every step. His men did not move independently like Shiban's Brotherhood, but were all parts of a well-drilled machine, Torgun's method of leadership is more like your boss trying to look busy by micromanaging every task. Even as they merged their formations, the two brotherhoods had kept themselves rather segregated. The last topic in their meeting before they had returned to the saddle is that Torgun had become a bit of a simp for the Sons of Horus after his brief deployment with them, where he had all but dropped the culture of the 5th Legion. Torgun Khan became Captain Torgun. The Brotherhood of the Moon became the 62nd Company White Scars. And every moment he can, he glazes the Sons of Horus assault doctrines compared to that of their own. Next is our mortal perspective for this book, with Iilya Revellion arriving at Ullanor. A general within the Departamento Munitorum, she spends some time on the pure logistical nightmare that Ullanor embodied. If Episode 1 of Star Wars taught us anything, it's that making your plot about tax law and logistics is a great way to hook your audience in. However, unlike George Lucas, Chris Wright uses Iilya Revellion to put the scope of these campaigns into perspective, using the mortal perspective to show the grand scope of these events from a more relatable view, and how even now the echoes of the Byzantine Imperial bureaucracy ring in its predecessor. One of her first observations upon Ullanor is the sheer scope of what was done to the world to prepare for the War Master's triumph. The path that had been carved for it, already hundreds of kilometers long, she estimated it to be somewhere between 200 to 400 kilometers wide. The grand processional now sat there, having served its sole purpose of giving the Emperor of Mankind a venue worthy of his triumph. Her first meeting is with the local liaison for the Munitorum on Ullanor, a tired-looking man counting down his last days of retirement. The only advice he can give her is that the White Scars are a pain to deal with and tend to do whatever the hell they feel like at any given time. Outside of that, he just whinges about all the ways they differ from the more standard legions. He does, however, give her one more piece of crucial information, a core pillar of the legion's culture: courtesy. With that, he sends her on her way with a promised meeting with a Stormseer, a White Scars librarian. His last tidbit to her as he gives her a farewell is to avoid any comparisons to the Space Wolves, as it seems to annoy the 5th Legion. If you think this isn't relatable, that's because you've never met a Space Wolf. The trip to meet the Stormseer is around 4 hours out of the way, a trek she would have to take in a Mechanicum crawler, which she spends some time going into autistic detail about the specific variant she was in, while commenting that her physical appearance was never quite something she cared over. Her meeting with the Stormseer, a reoccurring character called Tartugi Yasugai, I tried my best, goes off more like a first date than a meeting. Yasugi basically has a folder of her entire life, baby pictures included, while Revellion tries to determine if he is genuinely curious of the questions he asks of her, or if he's just screwing with her. At the end of their first meeting, Yasugi does offer her one piece of insight. The reason so few have managed to obtain a meeting with Jagatai Khan is because so few have ever actually asked. Yasugi promises Revellion that he would reach her, assuming he could secure a meeting, before departing to try and turn the Khan's ear. From here, we get a brief intermission following Yasugi's story, his introduction to Jagatai, and how he came to be part of the White Scars. While his chapter works great as an introduction to the character, most of it is unimportant to the greater context of the book, save for a single scene. As a psyker, Yasugi is tasked by his Khan, one different from Jagatai, to partake in the Test of Heaven. He is to climb a massive mountain on Chigoris and undertake the trial. This trial is manifested in Yasugi having a golden chalice apparate in front of him, filled with raw power. In front of him, 4 figures manifest with the bodies of men and the heads of animals, urging him with disembodied voices to drink deeply from the cup and to make the power his. Behind him, a single golden-clad figure stood beside him. While he never spoke, Yasugi had the impression the golden figure wanted him to resist the offering. But to a Chigorian, to refuse a gift was discourteous. So, to avoid such disrespect while still not giving in to the Chaos Quartet, he drank only a sip from the chalice before placing it down. Enough to be courteous to the 4 figures, but not enough to displease the golden figure which stood beside him. He had the impression that he both satisfied and disappointed both parties involved, though he felt the golden figure was less disappointed than the 4. When he awoke, he found his fingers stained red where the liquid power had spilled, staining his fingers forevermore. Now, to refresh some memories, both Shiban and another Brotherhood of Terrans have merged, the latter group led by a Terran named Torgun Khan. Both brotherhoods have met on their way north, joining together before arriving at an orc fortress their convoys had beeline towards. The fortress itself is made from the disassembled scraps of the orcs' previous vehicles, having basically brought their defenses with them. A boon when your species does not need to follow basic engineering practices, or just the rules of reality in general. Remember when I said jumping onto a moving war truck filled with orcs is only the second most suicidal thing Shiban does? Well, here's the winner. Instead of waiting for more of the Brotherhoods to arrive northward to help even the numerical odds, him and Torgon both stop short of saying men go in and attack the fortified orcs. This isn't exactly a small fort or some scrap walls either. The orcs used a set of natural ravines and cliffs as natural defensive spots to include their own defensive works, to the point the high command of the White Scars had named as forts the Grinder. We are talking metal struts on the exterior dug into the ground to catch bikers. We are talking high metal walls built around a cliff face, and fixed heavy weapon positions in high elevations looking over the entire defense. This fort is an Iron Warrior's wrecked dream, relatively speaking, and two companies of White Scars are saying fuck it, we ball. The Brotherhoods flanked hard left of the Grinder, riding low and fast in tightened formations to build up speed and momentum, while the walls were clogged with greenskin hordes ready to meet them. They had timed their charge with the rising of Chondax's brightest sun, letting the bright rays blind the orcs manning the emplaced guns. The last thing the first line of greenskins heard before their death was a single war cry, "For the Coggin." The walls were blown into Swiss cheese by a literal wall of lead from their Bite's bolt guns before Torgon's heavy support companies rained down on orcs and defenses alike. Every form of weaponry was concentrated on the wall's defenders in that moment. From heavy bolters, to missile launchers, to Volkite culverins, whatever metal struts or plates there once were on the west side were either liquid or slag. Shiban leads the charge to the breach, dodging a rocket which would have spelled his end. But his mount wouldn't be so lucky. As other jet bikes spilled into the breach, Shiban was thrown from his mount as it crashed into the salty earth. The battle itself was chaos, the air choked with smog and screams, the bodies literally raining from the air. As orcs began to surround the newly dismounted Shiban, they got to learn exactly why Shiban is just simply him. Just like the orcs on the war truck, he cut down greenskin after greenskin in a flurry of strikes, cutting an orc down with every stroke and another with its follow-through. This, however, is where Torgon and Shiban would begin to disagree. Shiban's pace was blinding, him and his men cutting through orcs like a spear tip through muscle. Their advance was blinding and brutal as they cut down the orcs before they could gather in numbers to crash down upon them. Torgon's men took a slower approach, their heavy guns going quiet as they stalled near their entry points. When Shiban asked them to pick up the pace, Torgon scolded him for such a reckless one. Shiban's reply? "We are advancing." For a full day, however long that is on Chondax, Shiban and his men keep up this punishing pace. Without the Terrans, they suffer grinding attrition as each emplacement and barricade costs them another man. Yet Shiban does not allow the orcs even a moment to breathe with his assault. As the sun rose on Chondax and Shiban finally called for a halt, the white, salty earth of the ravine had been stained crimson in blood. To give his men a favorable position, the Brotherhood of the Storm took a plateau that sat upon the Grinder. While it had very little in the way of cover, it offered his men a place to fire down upon any orcs still brave enough to try after getting turned into paste for the last 24 hours. Sadly, orcs aren't very well known for their smarts. They came at the plateau like a horde of shades, a tide of black bodies and red eyes that assaulted the Chagorians from all sides. Such were their number that Shiban could no longer tell the difference between his kills. Every strike felt like he was cutting at one massive organic blob. The assault lasted all through the night, not even ceasing for a moment to allow the Brotherhood to catch their breath. But as the final hours ticked by and dawn began to threaten the horizon, the heavy weapons of Torgon's Brotherhood opened upon the remaining greenskin hide, sending the survivors scattering in retreat toward the Grinder's heart. Torgon, it appears, had finally caught up to Shiban. Returning to our favorite bureaucrat, Iilya has done what just about everyone who has ever been told to wait in the desert for days on end has done: catch up on busy work and kick rocks. For 5 days, she waited for Yasugai to contact her, and exactly on the 5th day, she receives the message she had been waiting for. She would get her meeting with the Great Khan, and that it would be in exactly 1 hour from now. The White Scar lander they send for her, of course, arrives late, in case we needed another reminder that the White Scars are the cosmos' funniest goobers. Yasugai meets her in the lander and accompanies her to the meeting, alongside trying to alleviate some of her nerves by offering her some advice for her meeting with the Khan. While it is very basic advice of courtesy, such as looking him in the eye, we are, after all, talking about a Primarch. Even for more headstrong people, being in their presence tends to make even Astartes' minds turn to mush. The meeting would take place in a ship called the Swordstorm, a capital-class vessel basically modified for interplanetary drag racing, as it had been modified for speed. Have you ever seen those sleeper car builds where someone modifies an SUV or like an ice cream truck to drag race? Yeah, this battleship is the spiritual successor to those. Knowing the White Scars, they probably use this thing to race orc freebooters for their pink slips. Upon meeting the Khan, the first thing she compares him to is a big cat, the way he lounges about his quarters. So awestruck was she that when the Khan asked her the purpose of the meeting, she completely forgot. Thankfully, our maid man Yasugi is there to answer for her and to bail her out while the cat had her tongue. Outside of the playful cattiness, to Iilya, this was a moment of shock. Her memory had been her main tool in her life. She could always rely on it. She had, up to this point, been belting out the exact specs of every craft we have seen in autistic detail. While she tries to explain the Minotaurum's troubles keeping up with the 5th Legion, she deduces that the Khan is deeply uninterested. To use the words of a famous make-believe paleontologist,
T-Rex doesn't want to be fat, he wants to hunt.
The Khan absolutely does not want to be here. This is an interesting conversation to another Primarch, but the Khan is a warrior first and a commander second. This discussion simply does not get better from there, and Iilya only realizes why after the opportunity had passed her. She, like the 17 other representatives before her, had tried to tether the White Scars to the Imperial way of organization and their way of thinking. It was just as much alien to the Chagorians as their more independent ways were to the Munitorum. Yet another opportunity wouldn't be far behind, as the arrival of another Primarch would change her fortune. Horus Lupercal, both unannounced and uninvited, bursts open the doors to Jagatai's chambers. Some of you may be thinking, coming with no announcements? So disrespectful, and I'm sure that would annoy the very courteous Jagatai. And while normally you would be right, you forget that this is Horus. Jagatai would rise to his feet to greet his brother, forgetting whatever it was Revellion was blathering about at the time, and embrace the Primarch of the 16th. While Revellion is just a little busy processing the presence of the War Master, and basically being blown off, Jagatai is tasked down with hunting the survivors of the orcs on the world of Chondax. Oh, you thought these plots were happening concurrently? Nope. In medias res be upon you. Eventually, while Revellion is trying to become one with the chair, the two Primarchs leave the quarters while conversing, with Yasugai in tow. Revellion feels in the face of what she has felt today that her whole purpose here is wasteful, that there is no point in all the effort she had put into it. As she gets up to leave, Yasugai returns with a, well that was unexpected, and an invite to join them on Chondax, as well as a job offer. Jagatai had offered Revellion a chance to become his counselor and an advisor. As Yasugai puts it, we know our weakness. All things change, and we must change. With that fair share of politicking, back to the grinder. Shiban and Torgan have been cutting their way through the orc horde for 2 days straight by the time we return to the present, and Shiban's own Brotherhood is cut down from 500 men to a mere 200. These losses have been worse than decades of campaigning across the stars, but Shiban attributes that to the ferocity of the orcs. Despite that, it does little to lessen the desire to mourn the friends he had lost. Yet after 2 days of non-stop aggression, the pair had finally reached the center of the orc fortress. The last defense was in a massive, miles-long crater surrounded by cliffs. It was quite literally an open-air Thunderdome, with the fortress in the middle defended by some form of shielding. Oh, but that massive building they thought was a fortress to this point? Turns out it was a massive orc titan that the orcs had been building with what was left of their scrap components. Yet they had run out of time, and now the 5th Legion attacked from all sides. With the stage set, the orcs encircled, and our main characters prepared.
For the thousands in attendance, and the millions watching around the world, let's get ready to rumble!
The entire bowl was alight with gunfire and blades. Orc flak bursts exploded in the air, casting shrapnel in every direction as they tried to down the remaining white scars and jet bikes. Artillery blew salt and dirt into the air while stub guns fired in every direction. The orcs were lost in the Daka as they tried to deter the laughing killers now coming to finish what they had started. As the battle broke down into a mass of duels and brawls between Ivory Warriors and the Green Tide, the Orc Titan began to move. Metal plates and scaffolding began to fall around it as the Titan's head, about 20 meters, or 66 feet in freedom units, off the ground, bellows out a war cry akin to a bellowing furnace. In a David and Goliath scenario, Shiban and the Orc Titan are primed for a kaiju fight, and I'm screwing with you. A quick burst of bolter fire and an unarmored opening near the creature's neck is enough to throw the Orc war boss into a rage, busting out of the head of the Orc Titan like the Kool-Aid Man. Whatever orc of note you're picturing, at least double his size. The orc's fists are the size of Shiban's torso. This orc is both large enough and fat enough that the only ever time that it's made an appearance was to ignore your local game store's hygiene standards. The war boss bats away a white scar charging it like a children's toy, sending them falling towards the ground with crushed and rent plating. Despite its size and the white scar's infamous speed, its metal gauntlets seem to always connect with Shiban's comrades. The second hit that Shiban receives from the war boss lands on his upper gorget, clipping his neck as he is sent sprawling across the platform. Despite almost saving himself on a rusty piece of scrap metal, he tumbles over the edge, able to grab that same edge before gravity can pull him below. Before gravity can finish its tasks, Shiban was pulled from the edge as if he had weighed like nothing. As he found his footing, his eyes were met with a tanned, scarred face, fierce eyes, and a fur-lined cloak as the figure stepped over him. Jagatai Khan had taken the field right at its center, right where Shiban knew he would be. If Shiban was a blender in combat, compared to the Khan, he is a budget blender, good enough to turn whatever you throw at him into mush. Jagatai is a top-of-the-line blender, able to slice and dice the enemies of humanity to whatever viscosity tickles your fancy. While the war boss held his own against Astartes, Jagatai Khan was running laps around him in combat. The war boss would swing his iron fists at the Khan, only to find his afterimage waiting for him while the Khan's Dao sliced off yet another pound of flesh. With the war boss finally defeated, unable to even raise his own arms to defend himself, it lay in the salty earth weeping in its final moments. Shiban was discomforted by the orcs weeping, considering an ignoble end for the beast that had fought valiantly thus far, before the Khan's Dao would free his head from its overgrown body. With the Wog slain and all that is left being cleanup detail, the book closes out with Torgon and Shiban sharing a moment to laugh over some of the Khan's words and the delivering of the most dreadful of news. While the book does not cover what this news is per se, we all know what Horus would get up to after Olenor. Before I get into my own thoughts on this book, if you had enjoyed anything thus far, I encourage you to subscribe so that you can get notified on the next reading. If you have any further questions about the book or the Legion, I'd be glad to also answer or discuss them in the comments. With a synopsis out of the way, I can finally get to glazing this book like a Krispy Kreme donut. I've read quite a bit of Black Library books up to this point in my life, and Brotherhood of the Storm has remained within my top 5 despite it coming off a little bit like an introduction. If you are even remotely interested in Jagatai Khan or the White Scars, this is a must-read. Wait, hold on. This book does everything the 4th entry to the series, Fulgrim, wanted to do for the Emperor's Children, but doesn't suffer from the early heresy syndrome as Fulgrim does, where Fulgrim tried to condense a large number of events into a single book to its own detriment, not having enough time to properly play out its events or its characters. Brotherhood of the Storm exists exactly to do that. Despite the War of Chondax having little importance to the grander heresy narrative, its plot allows you to get comfortable with the characters and find your favorite gremlin in the bunch. Whether that gremlin is a combat blender, like Shiban, or a comfort character like Revellion, each has a part they get to play in the Legion's story. Brotherhood of the Storm is only the first in the trilogy of books. While there are other short stories in similar length to Brotherhood of the Storm, this one has earned its place as the first introduction into the 5th Legion, as its story gives you time with nearly every important character, while keeping its story self-contained so it can be read and understood from start to finish without knowledge from another Black Library book. Additionally, like all content, I had to cut and skip over quite a bit of content for brevity's sake. So while my synopsis covered the broad strokes, I had left plenty unsaid that reading the book will still be its own experience. The mainline trilogy starts at Brotherhood of the Storm, and continues into Scars, and culminates in the Path of Heaven, before the Legion's story converges at the Siege of Terra. Of that series, Warhawk specifically focuses on them. It is also easily in the top 3 best books for the Siege of Terra. Whatever your method of reading Black Library is, put Brotherhood of the Storm on your reading list. Whether you buy the real softcover books, or listen to it on Audible or another audiobook platform like me. Of course, there are other methods, if you don't have the coin to spare, but I could never recommend those. Okay, the book has been successfully glazed. I hope to see you all again when someone finally decides to ask Angron what's wrong.